When I looked at her in the mirror, her eyes were like glass, as if she had stayed somewhere else miles ago. Sharing a truck cabin with a stranger requires trust. When that trust breaks, only questions remain. She climbed in, near a rest stop outside of town, polite and quiet. But something about her felt hollow, like she was running a script instead of living a moment. At what point did everything shift? Was she really just a passenger? And what did the digital recorder show for those missing hours? Ray Dalton had been hauling freight across the country for 9 years. He knew the rhythms of the road better than he knew his own apartment. The long stretches of highway at night, the hum of the diesel engine, the way time seemed to stretch and compress depending on the load and the weather. May 14, 2021, started like any other run. He picked up a shipment of appliances in the morning, logged his start time on the electronic system, and headed west on the interstate. The electronic logging device tracked everything: start time, stop time, miles traveled, speed maintained. It was required by federal law now. The old paper logs replaced by digital precision. Some drivers hated it, felt watched and controlled. Ray didn't mind. The system kept him honest, and honest was how he built his reputation over 9 years. By 8 p.m., he was 200 miles from his destination. The sun had set an hour earlier, and the highway was quiet. Ray pulled into a rest area to stretch his legs and grab coffee from his thermos. The parking lot held a handful of cars, and one other truck, its cab dark. A family walked toward the restroom building, kids running ahead. A man stood near a picnic table, smoking a cigarette and staring at nothing. Ray walked to the restroom, came back, and found her standing near his passenger door. She was in her mid-20s, wearing jeans and a light jacket. Despite the warm evening, her hair was dark, pulled back loosely. A small duffel bag sat at her feet. She didn't wave or call out. She just stood there, waiting, like she'd known he would come back to this exact spot. Ray approached slowly. "You need something?" "A ride," she said. "West, if you're going that way." "How far west?" "As far as you're going." Ray studied her. She didn't look scared or desperate. Her posture was calm, almost too calm. Her eyes met his without blinking. They reminded him of something, though he couldn't place what. Glass, maybe? Something that reflected but didn't absorb. "Car trouble?" he asked. "Something like that." It was a vague answer, but Ray had heard worse. He'd picked up hitchhikers before, though not often. The company discouraged it, and insurance was a headache if anything went wrong. But sometimes people needed help, and Ray wasn't the kind to drive past when help was needed. "I can take you to the next truck stop," he said. "About 60 miles. You can figure things out from there." "That works." She picked up her bag and climbed in before he could change his mind. Ray walked around to the driver's side, got in, and started the engine. The electronic log recorded the stop and the restart. 8:17 p.m. Every moment documented, every mile tracked. For the first 20 minutes, she didn't speak. Ray tried small talk. The usual questions he asked passengers. "Where are you from? Where are you headed? What happened to your car?" She answered in single words or short phrases. "Ohio, West. It died." No details, no elaboration, just enough to technically respond without actually saying anything. Ray let it go. Some people weren't talkers. That was their right. He turned the radio on low, a classic rock station fading in and out as they moved between transmission zones. The highway stretched ahead, dark and empty, except for the occasional oncoming headlights. At 8:40, he glanced in the mirror. She was staring out the side window, but her eyes weren't tracking the passing landscape. They looked fixed, distant, like she was watching something that wasn't there, something miles behind them, or maybe miles ahead. "You okay?" Ray asked. She turned to face forward. "Fine. You seem somewhere else." I'm just tired. Ray nodded and focused on the road. But something nagged at him. The way she sat, rigid and still. The way her hands rested flat on her thighs. Not fidgeting, not relaxed. The way her breathing was measured, and even like she was counting each inhale. He'd driven with nervous passengers before. First-time hitchhikers. People running from bad situations. Folks who just didn't like being in a vehicle they couldn't control. They fidgeted, talked too much or too little, checked their phones constantly. This woman did none of that. She was still in a way that felt practiced. At 9 p.m., Ray saw the truck stop lights ahead. He signaled and began to slow. "This is the stop I mentioned," he said. 60 miles. Like I said, there's a diner, restrooms, phones, if you need one. She didn't move. "I can wait here," she said. "If you're continuing west." Ray hesitated. His destination was another 140 miles. He'd planned to stop here for fuel and food, then push through to the delivery point by midnight. Taking her further meant more time, more risk, more questions. "Look," he said, "I don't mind helping, but I need to know you're safe. You got someone you can call? Family? Friend? Anyone?" "No." "What about the police? If you're in trouble, they can help." "I'm not in trouble." Ray pulled into the fuel island and killed the engine. The cab went quiet. He turned to face her. "Then what's going on? Because you're not acting like someone who just needs a ride. You're acting like someone who's hiding from something." She met his eyes. For the first time, her expression shifted. Not fear, not anger, something else. A flicker of something human beneath the surface. "I'm not hiding," she said. "I'm waiting." "Waiting for what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her duffel bag. Ray tensed, his hand moving toward the door handle. She pulled out a phone and held it up. "This," she said. The screen showed a map. A blue dot marked their location at the truck stop. A second dot, yellow, sat about 30 miles east, moving slowly along the same highway. "That's him," she said. "He's been following me since I left 3 days ago. I thought I lost him yesterday, but he found me again this morning. I've been staying ahead, but he's getting closer." Ray stared at the screen. "Who is he?" "My ex. We were together for 2 years. I left 6 months ago. He didn't take it well." "And he's tracking you? How?" "I don't know. I've changed phones twice. I've paid cash for everything. I've stayed off social media, but he keeps finding me." Ray felt the weight of her words. He'd heard stories like this. Stalkers, abusers, people who couldn't let go. The kind of situations that ended badly if no one intervened. "You need to call the cops," he said. "I've tried. 3 different states. They say there's nothing they can do until he actually does something. Restraining orders don't stop someone who's already driving across the country. So what's your plan?" She lowered the phone. "Get far enough ahead that he loses the trail. Find somewhere safe to disappear. Start over. And you think riding with me will help? I think being in a truck is harder to follow than being in a car. He's looking for a woman alone, not a woman in a semi." Ray sat back. The logic made sense, in a desperate kind of way, but he didn't like being part of someone else's escape plan without knowing the full story. "What's his name?" Ray asked. "Does it matter?" "It might. If something happens, I need to know who I'm dealing with." She hesitated. "Marcus Webb, 34. He works construction, or did. I don't know if he still has a job. He's been doing this full-time for weeks." "And you're sure he's dangerous? Not just obsessed?" She pulled her sleeve back. A scar ran across her forearm, pale and raised, old, but not that old. "That's from the last time I tried to leave," she said. "He said it was an accident. The hospital report said otherwise, but he had a good lawyer, and I didn't have proof." Ray looked at the scar, then at her face. The glass-like quality in her eyes made sense now. It wasn't emptiness, it was exhaustion. The kind that came from months of running, of looking over her shoulder, of never feeling safe. "Okay," Ray said. "I'll take you further. But we're doing this my way. I'm logging everything on my recorder. Time, location, stops. If something happens, there's a record." "That's fine. And if he catches up, we're calling the cops immediately." "Agreed." Ray started the engine and pulled out of the fuel island. He didn't stop for food. The hunger could wait. Right now, distance mattered more. They drove in silence for the next hour. The yellow dot on her phone moved closer, then fell back, then moved closer again. Ray pushed the truck harder, watching the speedometer climb toward the legal limit. At 10:30 she spoke. "He's gaining. He must have figured out I'm not alone." Ray checked the mirror. Headlights behind them, far back but visible, could be anyone. Could be him. "How does he keep finding you?" Ray asked. "I've been trying to figure that out for 3 months. At first I thought it was my phone. I got a new one. Prepaid. Cash only. He found me within a week. Then I thought it was my car. I sold it, bought a different one, used a friend's name. He found me within 3 days. Something on your person? Jewelry, clothing. I've thrown away everything I owned. New clothes, new bag, new everything. Nothing I have now was mine before I left." Ray frowned. "Then how?" She shook her head. "I don't know. That's what scares me. It's like he knows where I am before I get there." The headlights behind them grew closer. Ray glanced at the speedometer. He was already pushing the limit. Going faster would risk a ticket, or worse. "There's a way station 5 miles ahead," Ray said. "State troopers hang out there sometimes. We can pull in, tell them what's happening. Will they believe us? We have the tracker on your phone. We have my log showing when you got in. That's more than nothing." She looked at the phone, then at the road ahead. "Okay, let's try." The exit for the way station appeared in the distance. Ray signaled early, easing off the gas. The headlights behind them seemed to hesitate, then continued straight on the highway. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was just another driver heading west, passing through like everyone else. But Ray wasn't taking chances. He pulled into the way station lot and parked near the main building. The place was quiet this time of night. 2 trucks sat in the inspection area, both empty. A single state trooper car was parked near the office, its engine off. "Stay here," Ray said. "Let me talk to them first." He climbed down and walked to the office. The door was propped open, fluorescent light spilling onto the concrete. A trooper sat inside at a metal desk, filling out paperwork. He looked up when Ray knocked on the doorframe. "Help you?" "I've got a situation," Ray said. "Woman in my cab says she's being followed by an ex. She's got a tracker on her phone, showing his location. He's been trailing her for 3 days across multiple states." The trooper's expression shifted from bored to alert. He set down his pen and stood up. "She in the truck?" "Yeah." "I can bring her in." "Do that, and bring the phone. I want to see this tracker." Ray walked back to the truck. She climbed down without being asked, duffel bag over her shoulder, phone already in hand. They entered the office together. The trooper took the phone, studied the map. "Yellow dot is him?" the trooper asked. "Yes," she said. "He's about 20 miles back now. Maybe less. He was closer before the way station exit, but he kept going when we pulled off. Smart. He's trying to avoid being obvious." The trooper looked up. "And you've reported this before?" 3 times. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. They all said the same thing. No crime, no action. He hadn't technically violated the restraining order because he stayed the required distance away. He just happened to show up wherever I went. "That's not coincidence," the trooper said. "That's stalking, interstate stalking, which makes it federal." He picked up his desk phone and dialed. Ray listened as the trooper explained the situation to someone on the other end. Dispatch, probably. Or maybe a supervisor. The conversation was brief and efficient. "We're going to set up a stop on the eastbound lanes," the trooper said, after hanging up. "If he comes back this way, we'll pull him over. In the meantime, I need statements from both of you." The next hour passed in a blur of questions and paperwork. Ray gave his statement first, walking through the evening from the rest area to the way station. The trooper typed everything into a computer, pausing occasionally to ask for clarification. Then it was her turn. She told her story from the beginning, meeting Marcus at a friend's party, the first few months of charm and attention, the gradual shift to control and jealousy, the first time he hit her, the hospital visit she'd tried to forget, the restraining order that hadn't stopped anything. Ray listened from across the room. He'd known the broad strokes already, but hearing the details made it worse. The way Marcus had isolated her from friends and family, the way he'd monitored her phone and email, the way he'd convinced her that leaving would only make things harder. She'd believed him for 2 years. Then she'd decided that harder was better than dead. The trooper's radio crackled. Ray couldn't make out the words, but the trooper's expression told him everything. "They've got him," the trooper said. "Stopped him about 12 miles east, heading back this way. Found a firearm in his vehicle, unregistered, no permit. He's being transported to county lockup." She closed her eyes. For a moment she looked like she might cry. Then she opened them again, and Ray saw something he hadn't seen before. Relief, pure, overwhelming relief. "It's over?" she asked. "This part is," the trooper said. "There's still paperwork, charges, probably a trial. But he's off the road. He's not following you anymore." Ray felt his own tension drain away. A gun. The man had been carrying a gun while following her across 3 states. If they hadn't stopped at the way station, if they'd kept driving until he caught up somewhere remote and empty, if Ray had dropped her at the truck stop like he'd originally planned, he didn't want to think about what might have happened. The trooper took her statement. Then Ray's. The electronic log from Ray's truck was downloaded to a department computer, showing the exact timeline of the evening. Her phone data was preserved as evidence, including the tracker that had led them to the way station. By midnight, Marcus Webb was in custody, charged with illegal possession of a firearm, stalking across state lines, and violation of a protective order in 3 states. Ray drove her to the next town, where a victim advocate met them at a motel. The advocate was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She'd seen cases like this before, probably dozens of them. She knew what to do. The woman he'd helped shook Ray's hand before getting out of the truck. Her grip was firmer than he expected. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to. Just stay safe." "I will. Because of what you did tonight, I finally can." She walked into the motel with the advocate. Ray watched until the door closed behind them, then sat in his cab for a long moment. The clock on the dash read past 1 a.m. His delivery was hours late. His dispatcher was going to have questions about the gaps in his log. None of it mattered. He started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. The road stretched ahead, dark and quiet. Ray drove in silence, thinking about the woman with glass eyes, who had seemed to be somewhere else miles ago, thinking about the yellow dot that had followed her across 3 states and the weeks before, thinking about the gun in the other man's vehicle and what might have happened if they hadn't stopped. The next morning, he called his brother, a police officer in another state, told him the whole story, start to finish. His brother listened without interrupting. "You did good," his brother said when Ray finished. "Most people would have dropped her at the truck stop and driven off, not gotten involved. I almost did, Ray admitted. She wasn't exactly forthcoming at first, gave me nothing but one-word answers for the first half hour. Victims rarely are forthcoming. They've learned not to trust anyone, especially strangers. The fact that she eventually trusted you enough to show you the tracker means she was desperate. She'd run out of options. She was, Ray said. I just didn't realize how desperate until the end. That's usually how it goes. The full picture only comes together after the fact. But you trusted your gut, and your gut was right. That's what matters. Ray thanked his brother and hung up. He sat in his truck at a rest area, coffee growing cold in his hand, and thought about trust, about how fragile it was, how easily broken, how hard to rebuild. The woman with glass eyes had trusted him with her life, and he'd proven worthy of that trust, not because he was special or brave, but because he'd made a choice, the choice to help when helping was hard. 2 weeks later, Ray got a letter at the truck stop where he picked up his mail. No return address, but he recognized the handwriting from the statement she'd written at the way station. The letter was short. Marcus had been denied bail. The federal charges for crossing state lines while stalking carried serious time. She was in a new city, new name, new life. She was safe. At the bottom, she'd written one line. You stopped when no one else would. That meant everything. Ray folded the letter and put it in his wallet. He kept it there for years. A reminder that sometimes the right choice wasn't the easy one. That sometimes helping a stranger meant taking a risk you couldn't fully calculate. That sometimes the difference between safety and tragedy was one person willing to say yes. The trial happened 8 months later. Ray drove down to testify, taking 3 days off work. The courthouse was in a mid-sized city he'd passed through dozens of times, but never stopped in. He found a parking garage, grabbed his folder of documents, and walked 3 blocks to the building. The prosecutor met him in the hallway. She was younger than he expected, sharp-eyed and businesslike. Mr. Dalton, thanks for coming. Your testimony is critical to establishing the timeline. Happy to help. What do you need from me? Walk the jury through that night, when you picked her up, what she told you, how you ended up at the way station. The electronic log from your truck is already in evidence, but we need the human element. Ray nodded. He'd been thinking about that night for 8 months. Every detail was burned into his memory. The courtroom was smaller than he expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a handful of spectators in the gallery. The woman he'd helped sat at the prosecutor's table. She looked different now. Her hair was shorter, dyed a lighter color. Her posture was more relaxed. But when she turned and saw him, he recognized the eyes, still watchful but no longer glass. She nodded slightly. Ray nodded back. The bailiff swore him in. Ray sat in the witness box and looked at the jury. 12 faces, tired but attentive. Please state your name and occupation for the record. Ray Dalton, long-haul truck driver, 9 years experience. And on the evening of May 14, 2021, where were you? I'd stopped at a rest area on the interstate, about 200 miles from my destination. I was heading west with a load of appliances. What time was this? Around 8:15 p.m. My electronic log shows 8:17 when I pulled out. And what happened at this rest area? Ray told the story. Finding her near his truck, the short answers, the glass-like stare, the growing unease as miles passed. The moment she showed him the tracker on her phone, the yellow dot that had followed her across 3 states. The prosecutor walked him through each detail. The conversations, the decisions, the stop at the way station. Ray's log was displayed on a screen, showing the exact timestamps. According to this record, the prosecutor said, you were at the way station for approximately 40 minutes before the defendant was apprehended. That's correct. The trooper coordinated with units down the highway. They stopped him at mile marker 42. And what was found in his vehicle? A firearm. Unregistered, no permit. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Ray understood. A gun changed everything. It transformed a story about obsession into a story about potential violence. The defense attorney stood for cross-examination. He was older, gray-haired, with a calm demeanor that didn't match the seriousness of the case. Mr. Dalton, you testified that Miss Chen seemed unusual when you first picked her up. Vague answers. Distant stare. Isn't it possible she was simply tired or distracted? Possible, Ray admitted. But there's a difference between tired and what I saw. She was still in a way that felt practiced, like she was trying not to react to anything. Practiced stillness. That's your professional assessment as a truck driver? No. That's my assessment as someone who spent 9 years watching people in my cab. You learn to read passengers. She was afraid of something, even if she was trying to hide it. Did she tell you she was afraid? Not directly, not at first, but her body language said it before her words did. The defense attorney tried a few more angles, suggesting Ray had been manipulated, suggesting the tracker could have been faked, suggesting the whole thing was a setup. Ray answered each question calmly and factually. The electronic log didn't lie. The phone records didn't lie. The gun in the defendant's truck didn't lie. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts: stalking, illegal firearms possession, violation of protective order, and the federal charge for crossing state lines to commit harassment. The sentence came 2 weeks later. 12 years, no possibility of early parole. Ray didn't attend the sentencing. He was back on the road by then, hauling a load of furniture to the coast, but the woman texted him that evening. It's over. Thank you. Ray texted back a simple reply. Stay safe. The months passed. Ray kept driving. The highways blurred together, one run bleeding into the next. But he thought about that night often, especially when he passed the rest area where he'd found her. The parking spot looked the same. The building looked the same. Nothing had changed except his understanding of what could happen there. He started paying more attention to the people he passed. The hitchhikers on the shoulder. The stranded motorists with their hazards on. The travelers at rest stops, who looked lost or scared. Most of them just needed directions or a phone call. But every now and then, someone needed more. There was the teenager in Nebraska, kicked out by his parents for reasons Ray didn't ask about. Ray drove him to a shelter in the next city, waited until he was checked in, and gave him $20 for food. The kid thanked him with tears in his eyes. There was the elderly woman in Arizona, confused and disoriented at a truck stop. Ray called the number on her medical bracelet, talked to her daughter, and waited 2 hours until family arrived. The daughter hugged him so hard, he thought his ribs would crack. There was the young couple in Tennessee, their car broken down with no money for repairs. Ray called a mechanic he knew, negotiated a payment plan, and followed them to make sure they made it. They sent him a Christmas card that year, and every year after. Small kindnesses, small interventions, none as dramatic as the night with the woman with glass eyes, but all part of the same pattern: seeing someone in need, choosing to help, accepting the risk and the inconvenience because the alternative was driving past. Ray's dispatcher called him a soft touch. His colleagues at the truck stops ribbed him about his rescue complex. But Ray didn't care. He'd spent enough years watching people struggle without help. He'd made enough excuses about time and schedules and liability. That night at the way station had shown him what could happen when someone finally said yes. The woman's letter stayed in his wallet until the paper fell apart from wear. By then, Ray had memorized every word. You stopped when no one else would. That meant everything. He repeated those words to himself on the hard nights, when the loneliness crept in, when the highway seemed endless and pointless, when he wondered if any of it mattered, the miles and the loads and the endless cycle of pickup and delivery. It mattered. It had mattered to her, and that was enough. 3 years after that night, Ray's body started giving out. His knees ached constantly. His back spasmed if he sat too long. His eyes struggled with night driving in ways they never had before. The doctor said it was age catching up, 9 years of sitting and vibration and irregular sleep finally taking their toll. Ray resisted for another 6 months, cutting back his hours, taking lighter loads, staying on familiar routes. But eventually the math stopped working. The pain outweighed the purpose. He put in his notice and drove his last load on a sunny morning in September. The truck stop, where he'd picked up mail for years, threw him a small party. Cake, coffee, a few speeches from drivers he'd known since his early days. Someone gave him a plaque with a miniature truck mounted on it. Ray Dalton miles of kindness. He laughed and said he didn't deserve it. They insisted he did. Retirement was strange at first. Ray woke at 4 a.m. out of habit, then remembered he had nowhere to be. He drank coffee on his porch and watched the sunrise, something he'd seen thousands of times through a windshield, but rarely appreciated. He read books he'd been meaning to read for years. He visited his brother and his brother's kids, stayed for dinners instead of rushing back to the road. But he missed it. The hum of the engine, the rhythm of the miles, the brief connections with strangers at rest, stops, and diners. The sense that his work mattered, that each delivery was a small link in a chain that kept the world running. He started volunteering at a local shelter, driving their van to pick up donations. It wasn't the same as hauling freight across the country, but it scratched the same itch: purpose, connection, the feeling of helping someone who needed help. One morning, he saw a car pulled over on the county highway near his house. A woman stood next to it, phone in hand, looking frustrated. Ray walked over. "Need help?" She looked up. "Dead battery, I think. AAA says 45 minutes. I've got cables in my truck. If you've got time, I can give you a jump." They walked to his pickup, and he grabbed the cables from the bed. 10 minutes later, her car was running. She thanked him profusely, offered money. He waved it off. "Just pass it on," he said. "Help someone else when you can." She drove away. Ray watched her go, then walked back to his house. The sun was fully up now, the sky clear and blue. He thought about all the mornings he'd watched from a truck cab, all the sunrises seen through glass smeared with road grime. He didn't miss the driving exactly, but he missed the purpose, the sense that each mile meant something, that each stop might be the one that mattered. The woman with glass eyes had taught him that. She'd shown him what it looked like when trust was the only option left, when a stranger in a truck was the difference between escape and capture, between safety and harm. Ray hoped she was still out there, living the life she'd fought for. He hoped her eyes had found something worth focusing on. He hoped she'd learned to trust again, carefully and slowly, with someone who truly deserved it. The letter was gone now, worn to pieces over the years, but the words remained, carved into his memory like mile markers on a long highway. "You stopped when no one else would." That was the job, really, not the freight or the schedules. It was the stopping, the willingness to see someone struggling and choose to help, even when it cost something, even when the whole story wasn't clear, even when every instinct said to stay out of it and keep driving. Ray had stopped thousands of times, for fuel, for food, for rest, but the stops that mattered were the human ones, the moments when he saw need and responded with action. Those stops had defined his career more than any delivery ever could. They had made him who he was. The woman with glass eyes was one of thousands, but she was the one who'd shown him what stopping really meant, what trust really cost, what the difference looked like between driving past and pulling over. She'd shown him that sometimes the right choice was the hard one, and that making it anyway was what separated decency from indifference. When you think about how real trust forms between strangers in a true crisis, what really makes a person worth believing when everything they say sounds like it might not be the whole truth at first?